The rope bridge was already burning when Elise Whitaker heard the first scream rise from Red Pine Gorge. Smoke twisted above the pines in a black ribbon, swallowing the late afternoon sun, and somewhere beyond the flames a wolf was crying out in pain. Not an ordinary cry, not the wild call of a forest animal. This sound was deeper, older, almost human in the way it broke at the end, as if pride itself had been wounded. Elise stood at the edge of the healer's yard with a basket of clean bandages pressed against her hip, her pale fingers tightening around the worn handle. For one breath, every wolf in Red Pine pack froze. Then the warriors began shouting orders, boots pounding over packed dirt, steel charms clattering against leather armor. No one looked at Elise. They never did when danger came. To them, she was useful only after the fighting ended, when stronger wolves returned with torn skin and wounded egos, when someone had to wash blood from sleeves and whisper comfort no one would remember by morning. At 22, Elise had learned to move quietly through a world that measured worth by dominance. She was an omega, small beside the broad-shouldered men and proud she-wolves of Red Pine. With chestnut brown hair, she kept braided down her back, and gray-blue eyes people mistook for softness. Her hands were gentle, yes, but they were not untouched. Small scars crossed her knuckles from years spent tending burns, setting broken fingers, and gathering herbs in winter frost while others slept warm. Her grandmother Mabel said those hands carried a gift. Red Pine called it weakness. "Stay back, Elise," Grant Huxley barked as he strode past her, his dark coat swinging behind him. The pack's beta commander did not slow down. This is not a place for trembling little omegas. A few warriors laughed, not loudly, but enough. Marissa Vale glanced over her shoulder, beautiful in fitted riding leathers, her pale blonde hair shining like a blade. "He is right," she said. "Bandages will not hold up a bridge." Elise lowered her eyes, because answering had never made them kinder. The words still landed. They always did. Somewhere inside her, a familiar ache stirred, the old bruise of being seen as less before she had even chosen. She carried the basket back toward the infirmary, but another sound stopped her. A second cry rolled through the trees, weaker this time, threaded with pain. Her body reacted before her fear could argue. She set the basket down and reached for the cream-colored scarf tucked into her apron pocket, the one Mabel had embroidered with a small crescent moon years ago. When no one knows what to do, her grandmother had told her, start by helping what is hurting. Red Pine's main yard had become chaos. Beyond the cabins and training posts, riders were gathering near the northern trail, where the forest dropped toward the gorge. Elise caught fragments of hurried conversation, fire arrows, old bridge, something trapped beyond the ravine. Then the air changed. A hush swept through the yard so sharply, even the horses stilled. Alpha King Rowan Ashford had arrived. Elise had heard stories of him since childhood, most whispered as warnings. The king with silver eyes. The ruler who crossed borders only when lies had grown too bold to ignore. He stood near the gate in a long black coat, tall and motionless, his presence pressing over the pack like the first weight of winter. His skin was pale against the dark collar at his throat, his black hair wind-tossed, his face unreadable. Around him, royal guards waited with disciplined silence, but his gaze moved over Red Pine as if he could hear every secret breathing beneath the soil. Grant bowed too quickly. Marissa lowered her chin with practiced grace. Elise, half hidden beside the infirmary steps, should have disappeared as she always did. Instead, for one impossible moment, the king's silver eyes found hers across the yard. He did not smile. He did not speak. Yet Elise felt the look like a hand against the center of her chest, steady and searching, as if he had noticed the one person everyone else had trained themselves to overlook. Then another shout came from the trees. The bridge is catching fast. A scout stumbled into view, coughing smoke. Something huge is trapped on the far side. Grant's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed hard. No one crosses until I give the order. Elise looked toward the darkening trail, toward the rising smoke, toward the unseen creature crying beyond the gorge. Her heart began to pound, not with bravery, but with a terrible certainty. Someone was hurt, and no one was moving fast enough. Rowan Ashford did not raise his voice, but the yard obeyed him anyway. Report. The single word cut through the smoke and panic with the weight of a command older than Red Pine itself. The scout bent at the waist, one hand braced against his knee as he fought to breathe. Northern Ravine, Your Majesty. The old rope bridge. We found signs of a struggle near the far side. Then flames started climbing the supports. There is a wolf trapped beyond it, large enough to be royal bloodline, but the smoke is too thick to see clearly. A change passed through Rowan's face so quickly most of the pack missed it. Elise did not. The cold mask remained, but something behind his silver eyes tightened, a private fear locked behind discipline. Caleb Mercer, the captain of the Royal Guard, stepped closer to his king. Oral left the west perimeter 20 minutes ago. The name carried through the yard like a dropped blade. Oral. Even those who did not know the great wolf personally knew what he meant. Not a pet, not a trophy, not merely a beast of war, but the living emblem of the Alpha throne, bonded to Rowan since the king's coronation. Grant Huxley's mouth thinned. With respect, Your Majesty, the gorge trails are unstable after last night's rain. If your wolf crossed that old bridge, he ignored warning markers. Sending men after him now could cost more lives. Rowan turned his head slowly. You marked the bridge unsafe? Yes, Majesty. Grant's answer came too fast. Weeks ago, Elise felt the lie before she understood it. Not in words, but in the shift of bodies around him, the quick glance one warrior gave another, the way Marissa Vale's confidence flickered for half a breath. The old bridge had not been blocked. Elise knew because she used the path below it to gather feverfew near the stream. Children dared one another to cross it. Hunters took shortcuts over it when they thought no elders were watching. If warning markers had ever been placed there, they had not lasted. She stepped forward before caution could pull her back. There were no markers yesterday. The yard went still. Grant looked at her as if a broom had spoken. What did you say? Heat rose into Elise's face, but she kept her hands folded around Mabel's scarf. I passed the lower trail yesterday morning. I could see the bridge from the creek bend. There were no ropes, no signs, no posted stakes. A murmur moved through the pack. Grant's eyes hardened. An Omega's memory is not a field report. The insult landed in a familiar place, but Rowan's gaze moved from Grant to Elise. You know the gorge? Elise swallowed. Every instinct told her to lower her eyes, to make herself smaller, to survive the moment by vanishing inside it. But beyond the trees, Oral cried again, faint and strained, and the sound stripped away her fear. Yes, Your Majesty. Not the warrior trails. The healer paths. They are narrower, but faster if someone is hurt. Caleb studied her, not with mockery, but with a soldier's attention. Can you lead us? Grant stepped in sharply. Absolutely not. She is untrained, and the smoke will confuse her. I will send my own men once the flames are assessed. Assessed? Caleb repeated. The bridge is burning now. Marissa folded her arms, her expression unreadable. Grant is right about one thing. The ravine winds can turn fire quick. If that bridge drops while anyone is on it, no rank will save them. Rowan's jaw tightened, and for the first time Elise saw the cost of being feared by everyone. No one dared comfort him. No one dared say aloud that the creature trapped beyond the smoke was more than a symbol. Oral was family. Elise knew that kind of fear, the silent kind that had nowhere to go because too many eyes were watching. She thought of Mabel, old and bent over her herb table, teaching her that mercy was only real when it became movement. I can show the way, Elise said quietly. Grant laughed once, cold and dismissive. You can carry salve and water. That is all. Rowan's eyes did not leave Elise. Why would you risk yourself for a wolf you have never seen? The question should have been simple. It was not. Elise looked toward the smoke climbing above the pines, and her voice came out softer than she intended. Because pain sounds the same, whether it belongs to a king's wolf or a stray left in the rain. For a moment, no one spoke. Something in Rowan's expression shifted, not trust yet, but recognition. Then he looked to Caleb. Take 6 guards. She leads. Grant's face drained of color. Your Majesty, I strongly advise against letting her near royal property. Rowan stepped close enough that Grant lowered his eyes. Oral is not property. The words were quiet, but every wolf heard them. And the next person who wastes his breath explaining why nothing can be done will answer to me after we bring him home. Elise turned toward the northern trail before her courage could fail. Behind her came the measured steps of royal guards, the restless movement of red pine warriors, and the heavier silence of an alpha king holding back panic with both hands. Ahead, smoke thickened between the trees, and somewhere beyond it, the cry came again, weaker than before. The northern trail narrowed almost immediately, forcing the royal guards into a single line behind Elise as smoke crawled low between the pine trunks. She moved faster than they expected, one hand brushing bark, stones, and broken fern stems as if the forest were a map written for her fingertips. The warrior paths climbed wide and proud along the ridge, but healer paths were different. They slipped through places no one important bothered to notice, beneath leaning branches, past mossy rocks, along deer tracks where injured things went to hide. Behind her, Caleb Mercer kept his men quiet, but Grant's Red Pine warriors followed with less discipline, muttering about wasted time and Omega superstition. Rowan walked near the center, silent as a shadow, yet Elise could feel his attention on every sign she stopped to read. A snapped twig, a smear of ash, a faint silver mark on a stone where something large had stumbled. She knelt beside it, and the breath caught in her throat. The blood was not red. It shimmered pale against the dark rock, bright as moonlight diluted in rain. Oral, Rowan said behind her, his voice barely more than air. Elise looked up and saw the king's control fracture for one heartbeat. Not enough for the others to accuse him of weakness, but enough for her to understand. This was not a ruler searching for a lost emblem. This was a man following the herd of someone he loved. Grant pushed forward before the moment could settle. A wild beast could have dragged him. We have ridge cats in these woods, and the storm brought down trees. There is no proof of an attack. Caleb crouched beside Elise, his gloved fingers hovering over the mark without touching it. Ridge cats do not use fire arrows. He pointed to a blackened shaft half buried beneath wet leaves. Its fletching was cut away, but the iron head bore a faint red stain where pitch had burned. Grant's jaw tightened. Bandits, then? Rogues from the east. Rogues who knew the king's wolf would be outside the perimeter? Caleb asked. The question fell sharp and clean. No one answered. Elise rose slowly, the scarf still clutched in her hand. The smoke thickened ahead, rolling uphill from the gorge in warm gusts. Each gust carried the scent of burning rope, singed pine, and pain. She pressed two fingers to her temple as a strange ache bloomed there, not her own exactly, but close enough to make her sway. Rowan noticed. Stop. The command halted the line. What is it? Elise steadied herself against a tree. He is scared, she whispered before she could think better of it. One of the Red Pine men scoffed. Now she hears thoughts. Heat touched her cheeks, but she forced herself to continue. Not thoughts. I can feel wounded animals sometimes. Only a little. Enough to know when they are fading. The admission cost her more than she expected. Gifts like that were safe in sick rooms and stories, but among warriors they became something to mock or use. Marissa, who had been walking near Grant, did not laugh this time. Her blue eyes moved from Elise to the smoke ahead. How far? Elise turned back to the trail. Less than a quarter mile. The path dropped steeply after that, stones slick from last night's rain. Twice Caleb reached out to steady her, and twice she recovered before he touched her. She was not graceful like Marissa or powerful like Rowan, but she knew how to keep moving when the ground gave way beneath her. That, too, was a kind of strength, though no one in Red Pine had ever named it that. Then the trees opened, and the gorge appeared. Red Pine Gorge split the forest like an old wound, deep and narrow, with a ribbon of white water far below. The rope bridge stretched across it, swaying between two stone posts, its wooden planks dark with age. On the far side, flames climbed the left support where at least 3 fire arrows had struck. Burning fibers snapped one by one, each sound small and terrible. And beyond the smoke, half hidden near the opposite anchor, lay Oral. The great wolf was larger than any wolf Elise had ever seen, white silver fur streaked with soot, one massive foreleg twisted beneath him, his breathing labored. His eyes opened when Rowan stepped forward, and a low, broken sound rolled from his chest. Rowan moved toward the bridge, but Caleb caught his arm. Majesty, no. If you step on that bridge in your weight and armor, it may fall before you reach the center. Grant seized the chance. Then we wait for ropes. We can lower men from the western ridge once the fire dies. Elise stared at the flames, chewing steadily toward the main line. The fire would not die in time. Oral's head sank back to the earth, and through the ache behind her eyes, Elise felt something inside him dim. She looked at Rowan, at the king who had ordered armies but could not command a burning bridge to hold. Then she looked at her own small hands, trembling around Mabel's scarf. I am lighter, she said. Caleb turned. Elise. Grant gave a harsh laugh. Do not be absurd. But Elise had already stepped toward the bridge, her heart hammering so hard it seemed to shake the smoke in front of her. "If we wait," she said, "he will not be alive when the ropes arrive." The first plank groaned beneath her foot, and every voice behind her fell silent. The bridge did not feel like wood beneath Elise's foot. It felt alive, shivering under her weight, breathing smoke through every gap between the planks. She kept one hand on the rope rail and forced herself not to look down. The river below flashed white between curls of black air, far enough away that a fall would become only a silence. Behind her, someone said her name, maybe Caleb, maybe Rowan, but the fire snapped over the sound and left only the beat of her own heart. One plank, then another. The bridge swung hard in the wind, and her knees bent on instinct. She was light, but the old ropes were tired, and flames were eating through the left side faster than she had hoped. Heat licked her cheek. Sparks clung to her sleeve. She smelled singed cotton and kept moving. Halfway across, a gust tore through the gorge, and the smoke swallowed everything. For several seconds, the far side vanished. So did the pack behind her. Elise stood alone in a gray-black world, one hand wrapped around burning rope, tears forced from her eyes by the smoke. Fear rose in her throat so sharply she almost turned back. Then Oral cried again, closer now, lower, a sound stripped of pride. It was not a royal cry. It was the sound of a living creature asking not to be left. Elise breathed through the corner of Mabel's scarf and stepped forward. The last few yards seemed to stretch forever. When her foot finally touched stone on the far side, she nearly collapsed from relief, but Oral shifted his great head and fixed his eyes on her. They were not yellow like ordinary wolves. They were pale gold ringed with silver, ancient and aware, filled with pain but not panic. Elise approached slowly, both palms open. "I am here," she whispered. "I know you do not know me, but I am here." Oral's lips pulled back, not in threat, but in agony as he tried to move. A broken shaft protruded from the thick fur above his shoulder, and another wound near his foreleg pulsed with a faint, unnatural glow, as if the arrow had carried more than fire. Elise's stomach tightened. This had not been an accident. She knelt beside him and pulled the cream-colored scarf free with shaking fingers. The embroidered crescent moon caught a spark of firelight, and Oral went utterly still. His gaze dropped to the symbol, then rose to her face. For one strange breath, the pain behind Elise's eyes flared bright, and the gorge disappeared. She saw flashes that were not hers. A black-coated king kneeling in snow beside a silver pup, a coronation beneath a blood moon, a vow spoken with one hand buried in white fur. Then the vision broke, leaving Elise gasping. Oral had shown her something, or her gift had reached deeper than it ever had before. Across the gorge, Rowan shouted, "Elise!" His voice carried command, fear, and something else she could not name. She looked back. Through the smoke, she saw him at the bridge entrance with Caleb holding him back, his silver eyes locked on her, as if the distance between them had become unbearable. Grant stood behind them, rigid, his face pale in the firelight. He was not watching Oral. He was watching the arrow in Oral's shoulder. Elise understood then that the secret was not only the missing warning markers. Someone here recognized the weapon. Someone had known where the great wolf would run. The realization should have frozen her, but Oral's breathing hitched beneath her hand. Suspicion could wait. Life could not. "Hold still," she murmured, though she was not sure whether she spoke to the wolf or herself. She wrapped the scarf below the wound to slow the bleeding, then reached for the arrow shaft. Oral trembled, a massive body fighting not to break under pain. "I am sorry," she whispered and pulled. The shaft came free with a wet sound she refused to think about, and Oral's head dropped against her shoulder, heavy enough to nearly knock her sideways. Warmth surged from Elise's palms into his fur, unbidden and frightening, brighter than any healing she had ever felt. The glowing wound dimmed. Across the gorge, the pack fell silent. Even through the smoke, they could see the light under her hands. Marissa took one step forward, her face changed by something close to awe. Grant hissed, "Witchcraft." Rowan's answer came low and dangerous. "No. Mercy." The word reached Elise like a hand through the smoke. For the first time in her life, someone powerful had named her softness as something worthy. But the moment shattered when the left support rope snapped with a crack like thunder. The bridge lurched, dropping several feet on one side. Oral tried to rise and failed. Elise looked at the burning path back. then at the great wolf who could not cross alone, and the truth settled over her with terrible calm. Reaching him had only been the beginning. The bridge lurched again, throwing sparks into the darkening sky. Elise steadied herself against the smoking rope, her breath catching as she looked from the widening gaps beneath her feet to Oral's wounded body. For the first time since stepping onto the bridge, fear settled fully inside her. She was not afraid of dying alone. She was afraid of failing after coming this far. Across the gorge, Rowan stood at the bridge entrance, every instinct driving him forward while Caleb and the royal guards held him back. "Elise," Rowan called, his voice carrying through the roar of the flames. "Listen to me. Leave him. I can lose the bridge. I cannot lose both of you." His words reached her through the smoke, and they broke something tender inside her. He was asking her to choose her own life over the creature he loved most. There was no command left in his voice, only a man trying to spare a stranger from paying too great a price for his grief. Elise looked down at Oral. The great wolf's breathing came in painful bursts. His injured foreleg could barely bear weight, yet when she touched his shoulder, he lifted his head and struggled to stand. He was trying to spare her too. "No," she whispered, brushing soot from the thick white fur around his neck. "We are both going home." She tightened Mabel's embroidered scarf around the bandaged wound to keep it secure, then slipped beneath Oral's shoulder instead of trying to lift him. His weight nearly drove her to the planks, but after a long, trembling moment, he found his balance on his remaining 3 legs. Every step would have to belong to both of them. Elise did not carry the great wolf by strength alone. She carried his courage when his body could not. Oral leaned heavily against her, his massive head resting across her shoulder while she guided him forward one careful step at a time. Each movement was slow, awkward, and painfully real. The bridge groaned beneath them. Flames climbed higher along the left rope, while the right side strained under every shift of weight. Smoke stung Elise's eyes until tears blurred the world into gray shadows. "Easy," she whispered, more to calm herself than him. "Just one more step." Oral answered with a faint rumble deep in his chest and forced his hind legs forward. The effort shook his entire body. Halfway across, one of the center planks cracked beneath Elise's boot. She stumbled, and Oral immediately twisted his body, taking the harder impact against his own injured side to keep her from falling through the opening. Rowan saw it. So did every wolf watching from the cliff. The great wolf was protecting the Omega who had come to save him. Marissa covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Even Grant stopped speaking. There was nothing left to mock. Rowan took one careful step onto the bridge despite Caleb's warning. He dared not go farther, but he refused to stand helpless while they struggled alone. "Keep your eyes on me," he called steadily. "Do not look at the fire. Count with my voice." Elise obeyed without realizing she had chosen to trust him. 3 steps, Rowan said. She moved. Now 2. Another plank. 1 more. Each number became something solid to walk toward when the smoke hid everything else. The bridge swayed violently as another burning support snapped behind them. A shower of glowing embers rained across the ropes. Elise instinctively shielded Oral's face with her own body until the sparks passed. Her sleeve blackened. She did not notice. Then Oral's strength failed completely. His forelegs folded beneath him, and his enormous body sagged toward the broken planks. Elise wrapped both arms around his neck, using every ounce of strength she had left to keep him from slipping sideways into the gorge. She could not hold him for long. Neither could he save himself. Across the gap, Rowan's expression changed. It was no longer the face of a king issuing orders. It was the face of a man witnessing a sacrifice he would never be able to repay. The final intact support rope gave a long, splintering groan. Caleb shouted for everyone to move back. Rowan ignored him. He extended his hand as far as he could over the collapsing span. "Elise," he said quietly, with complete faith. "Bring him to me." The last rope began to peel apart strand by strand, each fiber glowing red before snapping into smoke. Elise pushed herself up from one knee with Oral's weight still pressed against her side, but her injured ankle buckled beneath her. For one terrifying second, the bridge tilted toward the open gorge. Rowan stepped onto the first burning plank despite Caleb's warning, his hand reaching farther than safety allowed. "Give him to me." It was not an order now. It was a plea shaped like one. Elise could not lift Oral high enough, so she did the only thing left. She gathered every breath in her body, pressed both palms into the great wolf's chest, and shoved. Oral slid across the final broken planks toward Rowan, who caught the massive wolf by the scruff and foreleg with impossible strength. Caleb and two guards seized him from behind, dragging both king and wolf onto solid ground as the bridge screamed beneath Elise. Relief struck her so hard she almost smiled. Then the plank under her foot split clean in two. She fell forward, fingers clawing at the right-hand rope as the bridge dropped away behind her. Fire burst upward in a hot wave. Rowan lunged. His hand closed around her wrist just as the remaining span tore loose from the far side and vanished into the gorge. For a moment, Elise hung above smoke and white water, her body swinging against the cliff face. Her burned sleeve caught in Rowan's iron grip. "Do not let go," he said, his voice rough in a way no one in Red Pine had ever heard. Elise looked up at him through tears and ash. "I was not planning to." A sound broke from Caleb, half laugh, half prayer. Together, the guards braced Rowan while he pulled her up inch by inch. When Elise reached the edge, Oral, wounded and shaking, dragged himself close enough to press his great head against her shoulder as she collapsed onto the ground. The touch sent a pulse of warmth through her chest, and the strange ache behind her eyes opened again. This time the vision came clearer. She saw Oral running from the royal perimeter, not wandering, but following a scent. She saw a strip of red cloth tied to a branch, soaked with something bitter and sweet. She saw fire arrows waiting in the dark, and she saw a hand wearing a silver ring stamped with the crest of Red Pine Command. Elise gasped and pulled back from Oral, her face pale beneath soot. Rowan knelt in front of her, close enough that the smoke-darkened hem of his coat brushed her skirt. "What did you see?" Grant's voice cut in before she could answer. "She saw nothing. She is exhausted, frightened, and clearly unstable after touching royal magic." Caleb turned sharply. "You seem eager to explain her before she speaks." Grant's eyes flashed. "I am trying to protect this investigation from Omega hysteria." The word struck the air with ugly familiarity, but it no longer landed the same way. Marissa stepped between Grant and Elise. Not fully, not bravely enough to be called loyalty yet, but enough to change the shape of the moment. "Let her speak." Elise stared at Marissa, startled. Then she looked at Rowan. He was still kneeling, still waiting, not demanding the truth from above, but receiving it at her level. That steadiness gave her courage. "Oral was lured," she said. "Not by accident. Someone used a scent trail. There were fire arrows set before we arrived." Grant scoffed. "Convenient." Elise's gaze dropped to his right hand. The silver ring on his finger was smeared with black pitch along the edge, as if hastily wiped clean. She did not accuse him. Not yet. But Rowan saw where she looked. So did Caleb. Oral's lips lifted in a low growl, weak but unmistakable, aimed directly at Grant. The Beta commander went still. Around them, Red Pine warriors exchanged uneasy glances. The bridge was gone, the gorge smoking behind them, and the old order of the pack had cracked with it. Rowan rose slowly, one hand resting on Oral, the other still marked by the soot from Elise's wrist. His silver eyes settled on Grant with cold precision. "No one leaves this gorge until I know who tried to murder my great wolf." Silence settled over the gorge with a weight heavier than the fallen bridge. Smoke drifted between the cliffs, carrying the smell of charred rope and wet stone, while every pair of eyes turned toward Grant Huxley. His wrists were still free, yet for the first time since Rowan had arrived in Red Pine, he looked like a man with nowhere left to stand. Rowan remained beside Elise, one hand resting lightly against her shoulder to steady her exhausted body. His attention never left Grant. "No one leaves," the Alpha King said quietly. "Not until the truth does." Grant gave a short, bitter laugh. "Truth? You have an injured wolf, a frightened Omega, and smoke filling everyone's head. That is not evidence." Caleb Mercer stepped forward and opened his hand. Resting on his palm lay the blackened arrowhead recovered from the forest trail. "Pitch used only by trained border units," he said evenly. "Not bandits." Grant's expression did not change. Anyone could steal military supplies. Caleb nodded once. "That is true." Then he produced a second object. A narrow strip of red cloth stained with dried resin. This was tied to a pine branch less than 50 yards from the gorge. The same scent Beta Elise described before she ever saw it. A murmur spread through the Red Pine warriors. Grant remained silent. Rowan did not press him. Instead, he turned toward Oral. The great wolf had struggled to his feet despite the pain, leaning heavily against Elise. Rowan placed a hand beneath Oral's jaw, and the great animal answered with a deep rumble before lifting his nose toward Grant. His ears flattened. A low growl rolled across the ridge, stronger than before, filled not with fear, but recognition. Several red pine wolves instinctively stepped away from Grant. Animals did not lie about scent. Grant's composure cracked for the first time. He is confused, he snapped. He was wounded. Elise looked at Oral's eyes and felt the faint echo of the strange bond they now shared. Images flickered at the edge of her thoughts. The red cloth, burning arrows, a hand reaching from behind a pine tree. She took one slow breath. He remembers you, she said softly. Not because you attacked him. Her gray-blue eyes lifted to meet Grant's. Because he trusted your scent before you betrayed him. The word struck harder than an accusation. Grant's face drained of color. Around him, warriors who had served under his command looked at one another with growing disbelief. Marissa stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Grant, tell me she is wrong. He refused to answer. Tell me. Still nothing. Marissa's shoulders trembled. Then, with tears bright in her eyes, she reached out and removed the command clasp from his cloak herself. The small silver emblem struck the ground between them with a sharp metallic sound that echoed across the ridge. I followed you because I believed you protected this pack, she said. I will not follow betrayal. That single gesture broke the last wall around him. Grant looked from the discarded clasp to the wolves who had once obeyed him without question. You think kings save border packs? He shouted, anger finally overpowering caution. They come after the damage is done. I gave the Eastern faction a chance to bargain. Oral was never supposed to die. He was supposed to disappear long enough for Rowan Ashford to listen. The confession hung in the air, ugly and complete. No one spoke. Rowan walked toward him with measured steps, each one calm enough to make Grant retreat without realizing it. You did not betray only your king, Rowan said. You betrayed every wolf who believed your oath meant something. Grant glanced desperately toward the Red Pine warriors. Not one moved. Caleb placed iron restraints around Grant's wrists. This time there was no resistance. The fight had already left him. Elise swayed where she stood, the strain of the rescue finally catching up to her. Before she could fall, Oral shifted beside her, pressing his broad shoulder against hers to keep her upright. Rowan saw the gesture, and something gentle crossed his face, visible only for a heartbeat. He turned toward the gathered pack, his voice carrying across the smoking gorge. Look carefully at what stands before you. The strongest commander among you chose fear disguised as strength. The smallest Omega among you chose mercy despite fear. Remember today, whenever you are tempted to mistake one for the other. One by one, heads lowered throughout Red Pine. No order had been given. Respect had simply found its rightful place. Elise looked around the silent ridge and realized no one was looking at her with pity anymore. They were looking at her the way people looked at someone who had reminded them what courage truly meant. And for the first time in her life, that recognition felt heavier than every burden she had carried across the burning bridge. The word royal moved through the ridge more softly than any accusation, yet it shook Elise harder than the collapsing bridge had. She sat where Rowan had lowered her beside Oral, ash on her face, burns stinging along her sleeve, Mabel's scarf glowing faintly beneath her hand. Royal had never belonged to her. It belonged to banners, bloodlines, carved thrones, and people who crossed courtyards while others stepped aside. Elise had spent her life learning how little space an Omega was allowed to take. Now every wolf on the ridge was staring at her, as if the world had quietly rearranged itself around her breathing. Rowan saw the fear before anyone else did. He removed his coat and placed it around her shoulders, shielding her from the cold wind sweeping up from the gorge. No one will touch her, he said, not loudly, but the guards straightened at once. Caleb knelt near Oral and examined the silver-white mark beneath the great wolf's fur. It matched the crescent on the scarf exactly, curve for curve, as if two halves of an old seal had finally found each other. This symbol belonged to the moonward line, Caleb said, his voice careful. Healers sworn to the first Alpha throne. They vanished decades ago. Elise looked down at the scarf. My grandmother embroidered it. She said it was only a family pattern. Perhaps she told you what kept you safe, Rowan said. There was no suspicion in his tone, only understanding, and that almost broke her. Grant, bound between two guards, laughed bitterly from where he knelt. A hidden royal healer. How convenient. Red Pine shelters a treasure and calls her useless for 20 years. Marissa turned on him, grief and shame warring across her face. We called her useless because people like you taught us that kindness had no value. Her voice trembled, but she did not lower it. And I believed you. She faced Elise then, and the pride that had once made her beautiful now gave way to something far more human. I am sorry. Not because the king heard it. Not because Oral bowed. I am sorry because you were hurting in front of me for years, and I chose comfort over courage. Elise had imagined apologies before. In lonely moments, she had shaped them in her mind, sharper and more satisfying than any real words could be. But standing there, wrapped in Rowan's coat with smoke in her lungs and Oral's head heavy against her knee, she found she did not want Marissa humiliated. She wanted the world to stop making cruelty look like strength. Then choose differently now, Elise said. Marissa nodded once, tears bright but unshed. I will. Caleb's guards began leading Grant away from the gorge, but Rowan stopped them long enough to face the Red Pine warriors. His trial will be held under royal law. Any wolf who aided him may speak before sunset and receive mercy for truth. Silence will be treated as loyalty to treason. Several warriors dropped their eyes. The old fear Grant had built around himself began to loosen, not all at once, but visibly, like ice cracking under spring water. A young scout stepped forward first, voice shaking, and admitted he had seen red cloth tied near the west perimeter. Another confessed Grant had ordered the warning markers removed weeks ago, claiming the bridge needed to look open for a patrol exercise. Each truth made the air cleaner, though no confession could undo the fire. Elise listened until Oral stirred. His wound was still grave, the unnatural glow not gone, only dimmed. Instinct pulled her hand to him again, but Rowan caught her wrist gently. You have given enough. He is still in pain. So are you. The simple answer silenced her. No one in Red Pine had ever made her pain part of the question. Rowan's thumb rested lightly above the soot mark where he had pulled her from the gorge. Mercy does not mean spending yourself until nothing remains. Elise looked at Oral, then at the king kneeling before her in front of everyone, and felt the first strange shape of a new lesson. Healing could be shared. So she placed one hand on Oral, and Rowan placed his over hers. The warmth rose again, steadier this time, flowing through them both. Oral breathed easier, and the silver mark beneath his fur faded to a soft glow. At the edge of the ridge, dawn-colored light began to break through the smoke, though evening had not yet fallen. Caleb saw it and bowed his head. Rowan looked at Elise with wonder held carefully behind restraint. When we return, he said, your grandmother and I need to speak. Elise's fingers tightened around the scarf. For the first time, Mabel's old stories no longer felt like comfort meant for a lonely girl. They felt like a door waiting to open. Morning arrived quietly over Red Pine. The smoke that had darkened the gorge the day before had dissolved into pale mist drifting between the pines, and the smell of burned rope had begun to fade beneath the clean scent of fresh-cut cedar. Wolves from every rank worked side by side along the cliff, lifting heavy beams into place where the old bridge had once stood. No one gave the orders alone. No one worked apart. The fire had taken more than wood. It had burned away the lies that had divided them. Elise Whitaker stood a short distance away with her ankle wrapped and her burned arm resting in a simple sling. Beside her, Oral leaned comfortably against her shoulder, his great silver-white body no longer trembling with pain. His wound had begun to close, leaving only a faint silver mark beneath his fur where Mabel's embroidered crescent had rested. Mabel approached carrying the freshly washed scarf. The smoke stains were gone, but one corner had been permanently darkened by the fire. She folded it carefully into Elise's hands. Do not mend that mark, she said with a gentle smile. Some scars are not reminders of what we lost. They are proof of who we became. Elise traced the blackened edge with her fingertips. For years she had believed the scarf was simply a piece of family cloth. Now she understood it had quietly carried the history of generations who had chosen compassion over power. Rowan Ashford crossed the clearing without guards surrounding him. For the first time since arriving in Red Pine, he came not as a king inspecting a border pack, but as a man with gratitude he wished to speak himself. Every conversation around the gorge gradually faded until only birds and distant hammers filled the morning air. Rowan stopped before Elise, then did something no wolf expected. He lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps spread through the workers, but he paid them no attention. His silver eyes never left hers. Elise Whitaker, he said, his voice calm enough to carry across the gorge. When every path towards safety ended, you chose the one that led towards someone else's pain. You crossed fire for a life that could offer you nothing in return. Kings remember victories. Kingdoms remember heroes. I will remember your kindness. Elise's eyes filled before she realized she was crying. No one had ever spoken of her life as something worth remembering. Rowan reached into the fold of his coat and drew out a small silver clasp engraved with the crescent of the ancient moonward healers. Your family's place beside the throne was never lost, he said softly. Only hidden until the world deserved to find it again. He placed the clasp beside the scarf in her hands, but he did not take her hand in return. He simply waited. That choice told Elise more about the man before her than any declaration could have. He would never claim what had to be freely given. Behind them, Marissa quietly organized younger wolves to carry medical supplies across the temporary crossing before weapons. Caleb smiled to himself, saying nothing. Red Pine had already begun changing. Elise looked toward the place where the old bridge had fallen. She could still remember the flames, the smoke, the moment she believed neither she nor Oral would ever reach the other side. Then she looked at the first completed span of the new bridge stretching across the gorge. It was wider than the old one, stronger, built with a narrow healer's path running beside the main crossing instead of hidden beneath it. Mabel touched Elise's shoulder. Yesterday they told you to stay back, she whispered. Today there is a place in front waiting for you. Rowan extended his hand, not as an alpha king giving an order, but as a man offering a journey. Walk beside me, he said. Not behind me. Never behind anyone again. Elise looked at his hand, then at Oral. The great wolf stepped forward first, brushing his broad head gently against her arm before walking onto the new bridge. Elise laughed through her tears, took Rowan's hand of her own choosing, and followed Oral into the morning light. Behind them, the wolves of Red Pine watched in respectful silence as three figures crossed the first new bridge together. The old bridge had collapsed into the gorge, but it had carried something precious safely across before it fell. It had carried a forgotten Omega into the life she was always meant to live.